Blog Talk Radio.
Beyond the mundane, and given that Blog Talk's general state of being is weird, quasi-functional, does it acting this way actually constitute being weird when that is its general state of being? Who knows? Anyway, that and more, and other existential questions to be raised tonight here on Damn You Hollywood. I'm Robert Winfree. Thank you all for tuning in. Here with me... I got to get this out of the way. I'd like to apologize for not being on the Voltron show that took place on this same time slot last week. I was supposed to be there, but I was sick over the weekend, and I woke up Tuesday without a voice. And given that this is purely a vocal, auditory discussion medium, I had nothing to contribute if I couldn't speak. Such as the lot in life I drew it for that day. So I'd like to apologize to anyone who was looking forward to listening to that. Mark and Robert Cooper did a solid job anyway. I am hardly a necessary component for that. But just wanted to get it out there that if you missed that show and didn't, or I don't know, if you missed that show, they probably explained it, rendering this whole thing somewhat extemporaneous. Anyway, wanted to get that out there. Mark, how are you doing this evening, since I don't feel like rambling as much at the moment?
I'm doing fine. I'm currently, as you're bellyaching about Blog Talk Radio and explaining why you weren't on the Voltron podcast, I am reading an article from Gizmodo called Geostorm's Weather Control Tech is Exceptionally Bogus, Scientists Explain. I'm very interested in this.
There is nothing in that movie that operates as it does in real life.
Okay, I wasn't aware we were watching a documentary. It was a science fiction movie.
Look,
disaster porn.
Hang on, I will get to this when we actually do the review. There were leaps in this movie I was prepared to accept and go along with. And then there were those that I wasn't.
Okay. I'm curious to see where, at what point you said, that's it, I can't take this anymore, and threw your pants at the screen.
I can tell you exactly where it was. There were 3 separate instances.
Okay.
One is we can use satellites to generate tsunamis. I will go with your fictional weather technology in terms of microwaving things to increase heat. I will go with it in terms of slowing things down to cool them off. I am okay with it. I will go with lasers from outer space. I am prepared to accept this. There is no way a satellite from orbit can generate a tsunami. It just can't happen. There was the whole sequence with the space station exploding. I am so sick and tired of people rendering explosions in outer space in a similar fashion to how they go on Earth. For a very simple reason, there's no oxygen. You do not get flamed explosions in outer space because there is no oxygen. Without oxygen, there is no combustion.
You also don't get sound.
I'm well aware of that. You barely get light. I mean, I got so pissed at Star Wars when you kind of realize that no, like, none of that works that way.
Well, Star Wars is different. That is space fantasy.
I'm aware, and when I understood the blending of genres, I was less annoyed with it, but when it was presented to me as science fiction and I looked at it and went, no. Like, no.
Okay. So,
and finally, like, everything involving Andy García.
Okay. Let me say this as we get into this review. As I have said many times on this show, not a science expert, and I was willing to accept a lot more than Smarty Pants Robert Winfree was willing to accept because I just wanted to be entertained by the Earth being torn to pieces. That's what I went to see. That's what I got to see. So I was relatively happy with what I was watching. However, even I, dummy Mark Radulich, is getting a little tired of explosions in space. Because as I just said, space doesn't work that way. And as I just said, I'll accept it if we're doing fantasy. Like, you know, we not only have space that doesn't function the way space does, but we have unicorns and dragons and hulks and, you know, and just all kinds of nonsense fantasy. Fine, then all bets are off. And you know, and as long as you're consistent within your own universe, even if your own universe doesn't operate under physics, I'm fine with all of that. I don't go to the movies for lessons in science. I just want to be entertained. So, generally speaking, I'm willing to accept a lot, but this is science fiction, and while the satellite science in this movie may be nonsense, but nonsense I'm willing to accept, I still have a difficult time with the level of explosions on the space station that took place that are equivalent to something that you would see on Earth with zero difference. And I remember enjoying the movie up until that point where I was like, all right, I didn't come for this, and this is silly. But we'll talk about it when we get there. But even I had my limits, Robert Winfree. Even I had my limits.
It's nice to know we found them somewhere.
You know, you sound tired. You sound tired. You sound like you need a break. Why don't we skip next week?
No.
Damn it! I'm looking out for you.
No, you're not.
You seem exhausted. You seem exhausted. You seem like you need a break from all of this.
I am more frustrated with Blog Talk's inability to properly interface with my headset, apparently, than I am at anything else. And it also occurred to me that for the rest of the year, there's not a single movie we're reviewing that I'm actually looking forward to.
All the movies we're going to see, with the possible exception of Justice League, are going to be amazing. Don't you worry.
Huh.
I
will remember. You said that on air. It's now documented. You said you have high expectations for Jigsaw.
I mean, after Jigsaw.
No, you don't. You're just trying to poke at me. It's not going to work.
All right. Shall we get started with this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd ask about your expectations, but I want to try something. for two reviews specifically. One is this one, the other is the Thor review that we'll be doing in November after it comes out. I would like to ban the use of the word fun.
Okay.
Because
Go on.
You and I have talked about this. I am sick to death of the use of that word as though it falls on some kind of empirical chart. There is a fun line equivalent to a number line out there somewhere that critics have access to, and it falls on the fun or not fun side of the zero. I am sick to death of that being used as some kind of qualification for film quality. I am sick to death of pretending that everyone enjoys everything the same way or should enjoy everything the same way. And the fact that the rebuttal is, well, it's fun, means you don't actually have a rebuttal, just concede the point.
Okay. I'm fine with that. I will attempt to review this movie without inputting my own level of enjoyment in it, because if I did, I would have to say I had up until the stupid space station scene, I was having fun with it. So there you have it. That's the last time you'll hear me say it tonight.
Well, until we get, there comes a point when, okay, fine, at this point we can talk about it in those terms, but it just bugs me about criticism in general. That, again, you and I have talked about this, this movie isn't fun, and that's a big cardinal sin. Who the hell are you to pontificate, Mr. Wally Waffles? I can only work for myself because I'm such a hack that I have to be self-employed. Who died and made you the supreme arbiter of fun?
Well, I'll give you this. We need to talk about the critical elements of this movie, and you're right. A critical element is not whether or not you personally had fun with it. Critical element is looking at the special effects, the sound editing, the performances, the plot, etc. Notice I said plot last. So,
well, in this movie, that's because it's an afterthought.
So we'll look at all of those things where my personal enjoyment of it really has never mind.
And I will do my best to do the same until the point arises when, okay, fine. And then finally, did you have fun at it? So, all right, with that out of the way.
But I want one thing from you now.
Okay.
Okay. I want you to get through a plot synopsis without editorializing. Just tell the people what happens in the movie. That's it. I don't want you going off on one of your Mr. Wizard tangents. Okay,
I will save the Mr. Wizard tangent for after the plot synopsis.
Thank you. Just tell the people what happened in the movie.
All right.
And be entertaining about it. Juggle. Dance for me, monkey.
That's like asking me to juggle without giving me balls.
Oh, you've got balls, all right.
All right. As for this movie, we open with some voiceover narration from a girl who turns out to be Gerard Butler's character's daughter, explaining that the world went to hell because global warming is a thing. And in order to preserve the human race, all races came together in peace and harmony to build a space station and a series of satellites that have the technology to disperse giant acts of nature harmlessly. And this has been going for a few years, and everything seems to be basically okay. We then meet Gerard Butler, who is the engineer, scientist, responsible in chief for building the darn thing. He runs afoul of the politics of the situation by just not wanting to deal with politics, and really who can blame him. And he winds up being fired from his position running this thing by his younger brother, who is something of a politician. This leads to their falling out for 3 years, when things start to go haywire on the space station. There's a village in Afghanistan that gets bombarded with cold and freezes and kills a bunch of people. The people in charge of the space of this whole thing, they call it Dutch Boy, after the rather famous story of the boy putting his fingers in the dike to plug the leak. And they don't want this thing to keep going haywire. They want it to work properly, so they petition Gerard Butler to go back up to his baby to figure out what's going on. He somewhat reluctantly agrees to do so. As he's up there trying to figure things out, his younger brother, they kind of at the same time arrive at the conclusion he's told by a colleague of his who was subsequently murdered for knowing too much, because when you're trying to cover something up, that's what you do. Not an editorialization there, that's actually what you do. So they both kind of run concurrent investigations into this. Gerard Butler from more of the technical side, his brother from more of the political side. They find that there's a virus that's been implanted into the machine, the programming of the space station that is causing it to kind of go haywire. Well, why, you might ask? This thing is literally protecting the world. Well, because people want power. That's the answer given. As they are investigating, they suspect the president at one point, because he's one of the few people with the actual authority and positioning to pull this off. It turns out not to be him. It's the Secretary of State, who is trying to rid the world of the enemies of America, kill off everyone above him in the presidential line of succession, and take ultimate power, which he would kind of have if it actually worked. Anyway, they discover that on Earth while up in space. Gerard Butler winds up at the last second being able to flush the system of the virus, which requires a reset. They find the person responsible for implanting the virus. He is subsequently sucked into space. That's just how they deal with him. Sorry, I almost went off there. Gerard Butler nearly dies in the attempt, but he is saved at the last second through a series of improbable events. And he returns to Earth, having reconciled with his brother and forging a new relationship with his daughter, who shows up who is narrating, and we close with some narration from her about the necessity of human togetherness, etc., etc. Did I miss anything that you wanted to bring up as far as the actual plot of this?
Did you talk about them? I didn't recall you saying anything about the subplot of having to kidnap the president.
I did not bring that up. There is a brief subplot wherein Butler's brother and his fiancée, who works for the Secret Service, kidnap the president for his own safety. It's just kind of there to fill time.
Well, it's established that in order to do the system reboot on Dutch Boy, the president has to initiate the kill codes. He has to do this by biometric scan. So they need to get the president to a place, I guess NASA, where he can do that. Subsequently, they are being chased by the Secretary of State and his goons, who are going to try to just shoot them and kill them all during this huge storm that's taking place where the president is, which is at the time Orlando, Florida, because they're in the middle of the Democratic National Convention. All right, so here's what I thought was well done about this movie. I mean, the main attraction, the main event, the reason why you go to this is the disaster porn. You want to see, cool visuals of the Earth tearing itself apart. There's the sequence of the frozen Afghanis, which there's nothing really going on there. It's just in terms of action. They're just walking through the landscape, and you see frozen people, and they kind of mess with them a little bit, and a few of them fall apart. I mean, that's fine. It is what it is. The next sequence is like a gas explosion that happens in China, where basically hell erupts from the underneath the streets, and you have these large fiery explosions shooting up from the ground. The streets are cracking. That looked pretty cool. I thought that was pretty well done. The next one, I believe, is Orlando. And what's fun about that scene, in terms of visuals, is there's a car chase going on. That's the main point of everything leading up to the main point of that scene is this car chase between the Secretary of State, who is Ed. What was his name? Damn it! Where's the cast?
Ed Harris. It's always
Ed
Harris. Why? Can I just say, their little misdirect with maybe it's the president. I can't. If you bought that, I have to imagine you just don't watch movies, because there's two major things at play here as far as tropes go. A, it's always the Secretary of State, or the National Security Advisor, or someone in that type of position. Always. And B, it's always Ed Harris.
Okay.
It is always Ed Harris.
So Ed Harris, who, and I'm just talking about the visuals now. I'll get to that part of the plot in a moment, but Ed Harris and his goons are chasing the Gerard Butler's brother, his fiance, and Andy García, who is the president. And it might as well have been your average car chase, except that it's made a little bit more interesting by the lightning that is shooting down from the sky and actually hitting the ground. And it's almost like lasers being shot down, as if God himself was trying to shoot the president. I thought that looked cool, and I thought it made a rather mundane car chase that much more interesting. Then there's the tornadoes in India, which was kind
They're
of meh.
nothing.
Yeah. And then there's the tsunami in Dubai.
Meh.
That looked, it was okay. I think it looked cool to me just because, it was happening in Dubai, and so you have this sort of lively desert city, and then suddenly you have, it's turning into Atlantis. And that kind of looked cool to me, but the best stuff is in China and Orlando. So there's good and bad here. One, I was thinking a lot about The Day After Tomorrow in 2012, where I felt like you never got a break from the destruction. And I to compare these movies, I think there comes a point where you have to stop and let the movie breathe. So on the one hand, this movie does a really good job of breaking up all the destruction you're going to see in the movie over these different scenes that are not necessarily happening in succession. You have the bit with Afghanistan, then a couple of scenes later you have the bit with China, and then a good 15 to 20 minutes passes, and you get the bit with Orlando. Not too long after that, India and Dubai kind of happen around the same time, and they actually keep going back to India a few times.
For no reason other than to establish pointless tension over a small child and his dog.
But the point that I'm getting at is you're going to these movies to see disaster porn, your scenes of destruction, and they spread them out throughout the movie. So at least if that's what you're interested in, it keeps your interest for the length of the movie. It isn't, I can't remember if it was 2012 or The Day After Tomorrow, where it was just one long succession of destruction that seemed to have gone on forever.
Hang on, that's 2012. The Day After Tomorrow is actually a better example of what you're talking about, of giving characters in a movie time to breathe. There's long stretches of that film where there's no major destruction, but characters are still doing things. I actually like The Day After Tomorrow. 2012, on the other hand, is just... No. That's like one thing after another, and it's all John Cusack, so it's all just like unwatchable.
Yeah, this wasn't running from, this wasn't the main characters running from the Earth tearing itself apart. You have, it's brief moments of destruction, then it stops, and then there's more plot happening, and then there's another disaster happening. Really the highlight, in all honesty, is the Orlando sequence. After that, it's just sort of falling action. They're trying to resolve. Now the cat's out of the bag. They're trying to resolve everything and fix Dutch Boy, blah blah yakety schmackety. But unlike 2012, at least they spread out the destruction enough to keep you interested in the film. In theory. On the other side, I don't know. If you watch the commercials for Geostorm, you would think there's more destruction in the movie. And if that's what you were looking for, like just wall-to-wall destruction, this movie kind of disappoints on that front. Like I said, I just named off all the scenes of destruction there are, and I could have used a few more. I could have used a little bit more intensity in terms of what they were trying to do. But that's not what we got here. We got kind of a mystery. Now, let me talk about the performances. Gerard Butler's getting a lot of crap for his performance, and I don't know. I thought it was fine. I didn't think it was spectacular, but it wasn't like reading off cue cards or anything, I believed he thought he was that character. I was having a rough time with the guy that plays his brother, just because he had such a thick northeastern accent. Like he seemed to have just walked off the set of Welcome Back, Kotter. And I was like, how did you ever get to a high up position in the government talking that way? Like
because he's in appointed positions, not elected positions. Very
either way. But with that thick New York accent, he didn't sound believable to me in that role, in that position at all. Like I said, it seemed like they just plucked him from the crowd and were like, "You're Deputy Secretary of State." I don't know. I didn't buy it. His fiancée is fine. She's just an action hero in this movie. There's not really much to her. The kid who doesn't have a large part in the movie, but is establishes narration and all of that. I mean, she just has to react to a lot of scenes of her dad potentially dying. That's most of what she does. It's fine. Andy García is fine. The guy plays Secretary of State. I guess what I'm saying is none of the performances were outstanding. Everyone is average, or average or a little less than average, but not enough where it really took me out of the film. The plot of this thing. Okay. Here's where I want to talk about something that I thought was interesting. Because we live in a world where people voted for Donald Trump. I am going somewhere with this, and I am not necessarily trying to be political. But we do live in a world where people bought into the idea of Ed Harris, that's his name. I got to remember that. Where, Donald Trump is going to make America great again. The implication being that white people, specifically white men, have lost their grip on power in this country, and he's going to give it back to them. He's going to take it from the blacks. He's going to take it from the Mexicans. He's going to take it from the gays, and he's going to give it back to white, straight men. Okay? That's the belief. That's why they elected him president, by and large. And along with that is the idea of this transition of America from being one of the few global superpowers to being part of a global community. And you have Ed Harris, who makes a speech in the movie about that's kind of what's informing. It isn't just that he wants to be president. It's that, without necessarily saying all of what I just said, but implying a lot of it, he's like, look, we almost faced destruction on this planet, and it was working with these other countries. How do I put this? The way that I understood what he was saying was essentially, depending on other countries to come together, nearly killed us all. There has to be one strong power in this world, and it needs to be us. And so, yeah, I'll be president, but by setting up all these storms and wiping out our enemies, we can reshape the world back to 1950, the way it
45.
should be.
He specifically
45.
said 1945, when America was a shining city on a hill.
Okay, sorry, 1945. And that resonates thematically with what's going on in this country. There are people who wish we would go back to 1950, 1945, because then they would have the majority of control in this country. We mostly lived in one-income homes where the man went out to work and the wife stayed home. You had
gas was less than $1 a gallon.
You had less integration. Gays were in the closet. Now, I'm not advocating for any of these things. I'm saying this is how people think, this is how they vote, and this is what the film was talking about. Now, they absolutely villainized it by essentially creating a villain character who espouses these things. But I think you have to. It was. I don't know if poignant's the right word, but it was one of those moments in the film that, despite all the silliness, despite the nonsense happening in the film, was like, wow, that's a resonant point in today's society. There are absolutely people who think that way. And we talk about how the best villains in a movie are the ones that absolutely feel like they are doing the right thing and have a point of view. How he carries out his point of view and what he does and the lengths that he goes. Okay, so that all makes him horrible. But he's coming from the exact same place that almost half the voting public in our last election were also coming from, by and large. So I get why Hollywood writers would put that in there and say, look, see, that the way that you feel is bad, and it's now and it's going to be a major source of this guy's character. But it spoke to me in the sense that, or at least we're talking about it, in a very silly film that nobody saw, but at least we are talking about this sort of thing. So I liked it. I liked that was where he was coming from. It wasn't just a mustache twirly thing. He was like, oh, I just want to be president. Like, no, he had an agenda, a resonant agenda.
Of course, so did the writer, which included smart cars. A literal scene where a smart car outruns a Humvee, which is then crushed by a building.
So, lastly, the overall plot of this thing, I thought was... This took me on a range of emotions, because in the beginning when you're talking about, like, we can't get our shit together, and, we almost face global extinction, due to global climate change. And I was like, okay, I'm not one of these people who denies global climate change and the damage that it's going to do. However, I still don't want my nose rubbed in it. And this felt a little nose rubby. It felt a little too, the episode of South Park where everyone's driving Priuses and they love the smell of their own farts. Felt a little too much like that. But then we eased out of that and into the plot of the movie. And I like the idea of what, science fiction or not, that, they built this satellite to try to stop global catastrophes before natural disasters before they happen with the space station. And the space station is working fine until somebody hacks it for this nefarious plot. And then it's a whodunit. And that's what I'm getting to. One of the things I liked about this movie, and I thought was interesting, and it made it different than The Day After Tomorrow or 2012, where it's just nature gone crazy, basically. And my struggle with those movies is the villains are always people sort of reacting to things. You know, I think it's The Day After Tomorrow where they won't let everybody on the boats. I don't even remember what happened in 2000. Shit. I'm mixing up my movies.
They're very similar. It's completely understandable.
In any case, the point is there's always the villain is always somebody who's just a dick in the middle of things, reacting to the natural disasters. But the natural disasters are the actual villains, and they just make for shitty villains. I like the structure of this movie because essentially everything was working fine until the villains got a hold of it and started using it for horrible things, and then they had to figure out who the villains were, and then they had to deal with the villains, and then they had to fix the problem in the ta-da nick of time. I thought that's solid movie structure. Is this movie the greatest movie I've ever seen? No, obviously not. It's really silly in a lot of places. Like I said, it could have used a few more disaster sequences. And the acting is about par to subpar. It's kind of a C+, B-, somewhere in there, depending on how you personally feel about these things.
You're being generous.
As far as the critical elements go, it's not the worst made movie I've ever seen. Today I watched Halloween 3: Season of the Witch. That's far worse than this, in my opinion.
I could not possibly disagree with you more.
Okay. But we'll hear more about that on Thursday on Trial in Theory. So, those are my thoughts. Your witness, sir.
All right. Let me preface everything I'm about to say with the following. I like disaster movies.
Hang on. Before you start, how much of what I said made you want to cut yourself? I'm just curious.
Not much.
Or even just quit the show because you can't stand me anymore.
Okay, first of all, cutting myself would probably be easier than quitting the show. And so, I mean, just as a point of reference, I've got like 5 or 6 very sharp knives within arm's reach as I sit here right now. I mean, that's easy.
Okay.
I got a straight razor, too.
Anyway.
All right, anyway. Again, let me preface this with, I tend to like disaster movies. I don't know why. I could not possibly tell you the genesis of this proclivity of mine. But I do. And, I mean, we talked about San Andreas last year, which I actually enjoyed. I enjoy The Day After Tomorrow. 2012, not so much. But I kind of dig disaster movies in that vein. I am very forgiving of them in terms of my enjoyment because, let's face it, none of them are good. But I can usually, unless they're just really, really bad, I can probably enjoy myself. And then there's this. See, I find almost nothing positive to say about this. I didn't care for the effects. I know a lot of this boggles my mind that there are people out there, critics, praising the effects. It boggles the mind. Like, have you never seen well done effects like this? Because they don't look like this. They don't look like what we got on the screen. I mean, this is a disaster movie without a legitimately decent disaster sequence. It just doesn't exist in this film. I mean, I get that Mark kind of enjoyed the car chase, but it was so poorly edited that I couldn't enjoy it. There's no major signature disaster sequence. I mean, we could have used another major sequence or two in this movie. I don't want just running disaster, but there's big stretches of this where they tried to go for political intrigue, and it really is mundane. There's just nothing interesting or memorable about it. And, I mean, God, this is so frustrating. I almost have too much that I want to bash on here. The performances are all generally acceptable. I'll agree with Mark as far as that goes. Unfortunately, this film just winds up being, and when I say derivative, I don't mean it the same way a lot of reviewers do, like, well, this is similar to another movie, so it must be derivative. Like, that's stupid. That's a horrible, horrible standard to measure against. When I say this is derivative, it's not because, well, it's similar to these other movies. It's more like, well, these other movies did this, so why don't we do it? Which is, I feel, is an entirely different point to argue from. You had the dad with his daughter, and he nearly dies in the end, and, I mean, do I have to list the sheer number of disaster movies that have that in them? You have the evil government. Again, do I have to list them? You have God, there's just nothing good here. There's just nothing good. And, there was one other thing. Oh, crap, what was it? I had something very specific. All right, in addition to, because I don't want to go into this I don't want to go into the details. Let me say this. Nothing in this movie works this way. Nothing.
Oh, here we go.
And I was prepared to go on a journey of suspension of disbelief in some respects. I think it's just stupid not to if you're going into a movie like this. If you go into a movie like this and go, they couldn't possibly build a satellite network like that, shut up. Satellites don't control the weather, shut up. All right? There is some suspension of disbelief that has to occur when you're watching a movie. Otherwise, I would love to take any of you to a firing range sometime, and you can all see what a muzzle flash actually looks like. Because I'll tell you, it doesn't look a damn thing like they show in Hollywood. And then we can have a discussion about the validity of muzzle flash suppressors. It's not really a thing. It's a sound suppressor. Muzzle flashes below a certain caliber aren't even detectable by the naked eye.
You're going off track, sir.
I know. So again, if you're not, you have to be okay with some suspension of disbelief. And I was okay with the laser beams. There's a laser beam that they actually push, navigate through part of Moscow. And believe it or not, I was somewhat okay with that.
Oh, that's
but
right.
then they had it create a tsunami. I shouldn't have to explain the physics of, wave physics. You cannot use a satellite unless it actually falls into the water to create a wave, much less one of that size. Tsunamis are caused by severe sudden displacement of water, which you cannot affect via satellite transmission. I mean, I take umbrage with the whole bit in Hong Kong, too. If you have heated up an area to the point where you are warping and bending metal underground, you're at a point where human skin just combusts. There is an actual burning temperature for the flesh on your body. So if he's in that area when they're heating up metal to the point where it expands and violently and the gas ignites, you're just going to die anyway. That's just how that is. Again, explosions in space don't look anything like that. Somewhat ironically, until the final scene of the space station exploding, which is slightly more accurate. But I mean, there's whole segments in that space in that area. Sorry, not sequence, but there's multiple times when Gerard Butler is flung through outer space, And it's pretty clear the director had seen Gravity at some point and thought, ooh, that looks kind of cool. There's nothing here interesting. There's nothing here original. Again, it's never the president. It's always the conniving underling. And it's almost always Ed Harris. If Ed Harris is in your movie, unless it is based on actual events, say Apollo 13, he's probably going to be the bad guy. It's almost always Ed Harris. So Ed Harris, as Secretary of State, there's not a more telegraphed finish. There just isn't. And, I mean, at least Armageddon had the good sense to kill Bruce Willis to kind of drive home that there is some emotional weight to these types of things. I maintain Armageddon's an exceptionally well-written film, despite being grossly inaccurate scientifically and directed by a hack. If you like disaster movies, like me, if you like me, and you do enjoy these types of movies, I can only tell you this. There's better. There is so much better already out there in the world at your fingertips that you can watch. Save the money that you would have spent on this movie. Watch something else. If you want, again, larger budgets, I actually do recommend San Andreas. There's a lot good about it, especially once you get past that stupid opening sequence. If you want a smaller, slightly more intimate disaster movie, there's a movie from the mid-'90s, possibly late 90s, called Dante's Peak. It stars Linda Hamilton and Pierce Brosnan. It's a really good one. There's a lot of good disaster movies. This isn't one of them. Pretty much everything in this movie you've already seen. You've already seen done better. Save your money. Find it elsewhere. And again, I cannot recommend anything about this movie under basically any context to essentially anyone.
Jesus Christ. May God have mercy on all your souls.
I wouldn't go that far, but I am saving that line. There's other movies that are coming out probably this year that I imagine having a very strong negative reaction to that I will probably bust that line out for. I'm not going to waste it here.
Okay. Well, I clearly didn't have as many problems with this movie as you did. But then again, as we have determined many times on this show, sometimes we have similar tastes, and sometimes we couldn't have less similar tastes. It really depends on the movie, depends on the genre, But that's where we talk to each other about these things, I can't believe you like that. I can't believe you didn't like that. Yeah, that's what we do here. All right, I'm not going to.
It will happen again in the very near future. I feel almost certain of it.
Right, I'm not going to belabor the point anymore. I had intended this to be kind of a shorter show, keep it around an hour, and we have 10 minutes left. Oh boy, boy have I lost track of time. All right, so with that being said, here come the money.
Here comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, money, money.
Dollar, dollar. Dollar, dollar.
All right. Well, this thing is set to lose $100 million. It had a budget of 120. Now, I've been doing some reading about this. This actually had a budget of I think like 60 or 80 million, something in there. But the test screenings went so badly that they reshot a lot of the movie. It seems to be a thing now in Hollywood. And so
you'd think they'd learn. You'd just think they'd look at something like Pan or King Arthur. I mean, King Arthur, Legend of the Sword had a whole other bag of fish, including a couple of failed starting productions rather than simply reshooting after test screenings. But you just think they'd learn. This is going to suck. Well, if we spend another $80 million on it.
Here's the other thing, and I'm realizing this more and more. that this had several pushbacks. I mean, like by several years, this thing got pushed back. This was actually supposed to come out when Dawn of Justice came out, but they decided to put Warner Brothers, that is, decided to put Dawn of Justice on Geostorm's date and moved it back. And then it moved it back again and again. This actually was supposed to come out January, but it got pushed back to October as the final pushback date. And every time they push the movie back, it costs more money. So I'm not surprised the budget blew up to $120 million. And what I was reading was this has to make somewhere between $300 and $350 million at this point to break even after all the delays and reshoots and everything else. And it's currently made worldwide $66 million. As I said, it's tracking to lose about $100 million this year. Be one of the third biggest, actually, box office bomb, according to Wikipedia. On the worst opening, Super Saturated, it ranks 142. Worst opening, Super Saturated Adjusted, it came in at number 90. So, yeah, it's not doing well. I mean, when I say nobody went to go see this thing in America, I'm not kidding. It was like 14 million. And just to give you a comparison, okay, this is what people went to go see. Medea. Tyler Perry's Boo 2, a Medea Halloween, its weekend domestic gross was like $21 million and was the number one movie of the weekend and knocked Happy Death Day from 1 to 3. Now, Geostorm came in number 2, but when I tell you, like, there was no competition this weekend, as far as, what else is going on in theaters that's fairly new. I mean, I'll just read off the top 10 here. Yeah. So Tyler Perry, that was the big hit this weekend.
May God have mercy on your soul if you continue to support Tyler Perry at this point in his career, because I will not.
That had a budget of $25 million, and it's only been released in America, and it's currently at 22.
He's a smart movie maker. I find his content terrible, but he keeps his budgets reasonable. He appeals to a wide audience, and for some reason, Oprah constantly plugs his stuff. So he's a smart business investment at this point, even if his movies are just the dirt worst.
Yeah, like I say, he's got his niche audience. Geostorm came in at number 2 with $13 million for the weekend. Happy Death Day went from 1 to 3 with $9 million, and I'm rounding. Blade Runner went from 2 to 4 with $7 million. Only the Brave debuted at number 5, which I believe is the firefighter movie. With the kid who played Mr. Fantastic, who's on like everything now. The Foreigner with
Why
Jackie
is Miles
Chan.
Teller a thing? Someone's going to really have to explain to me one of these days.
Well, we're not doing it tonight.
What deity Miles Teller sold his soul to get 5 years of solid acting, of solid, consistent work out of Hollywood?
The Foreigner with Jackie Chan dropped from 3 to 6. It dropped from 4 to 7 with $3 million. The Snowman, which Robert would have much rather reviewed, but
you have no idea.
You
have no idea how much I would have rather reviewed The Snowman.
It too bombed. It debuted at number 8, and just to tell you, on a $35 million budget, domestically it made $3 million. Foreign it made $20 for a grand total of $23 million. Again, nobody saw this, and apparently it's being panned by critics. So there you go. It bombed on both fronts. But
it's also in a better spot to potentially be profitable than various other movies.
True. The Tom Cruise movie about cocaine, American Made, dropped from 6 to 9. The Kingsman, The Golden Circle, one of the few franchise movies I wasn't going anywhere near, dropped from 7 to 10. The Mountain Between Us, which is...
I feel like that thing has.
Who? The Kingsman?
Golden Circle.
Yeah, Kingsman, The Golden Circle. Got it. On a budget of 104... No, it's fine.
Okay.
It made $250 million foreign and almost $100 million domestic for a $344 million take so far.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's
it's
not
fine.
good relative to the first one, but all things considered, it's fine. Okay.
Yep. Okay, so back to the list here. The Mountain Between Us, which is the survival movie with Idris Elba, dropped from 5 to 11. Same kind of different as Me debuted at number 12. I have no idea what that is. The Lego Ninjago movie dropped from 8 to 13. Victoria and Abdul, which is a period piece, dropped from 10 to 14. My Little Pony dropped from 9 to 15. Marshall dropped from 11 to 6. Because that's how the song goes. My Little Pony. Marshall
it's a good
dropped
thing
from
you're
11
an empathetic human being with a social working degree, because you're a terrible singer.
My Little Pony. Da, 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 da. This is Planet Hulk. I'm sorry, I got lost in my own thing again. Gulmal again debuted at
But
number 17.
you did bring up two things that suck almost equally.
So that's really it for the list. The next two things is not really worth talking about. They made less than $1 million. So, where do we stand right now? Not a whole lot of change in the top 10, to be honest with you. But we like to talk about it. So here we go. Worldwide, it's the only thing that matters to me. Beauty and the Beast is still number 1. Fate of the Fury is still number 2. Despicable Me, number 3. Spider-Man, we talked about a couple of weeks ago, has climbed all the way to number 4. Good for Sony. So Sony's only win this year was done by the Disney people. I
wonder how much of the
everyone
profits they're splitting with Disney and Marvel for that.
But I mean, like, I just look at, if you look at Sony in terms of studio takes, they're number 5 for the year with a 9.4 take. And here's the movies that they've given us. Okay, so Spider-Man's number 1, right? But that was done by the Marvel people. So if you take out Spider-Man, their number 1 movie this year was from their TriStar imprint, which is Baby Driver. And coming in at number 3 was the Emoji Movie. Number 4 was The Dark Tower, which bombed. Smurfs. Passengers, which is from 2016. Underworld. Life, which also bombed. Resident Evil. Rough Night. And this only gets worse after that.
There was nothing but bombs for Sony this year, outside of them going to Disney on bended knee saying, please, 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 we don't know what to do with this character.
Yeah. Anyway, so, I mean, the people at Sony must be on suicide watch at this point. Wolf Warrior, which is a Chinese movie, came as number 5. Guardians has pretty much stayed put at number 6. Wonder Woman, number 7. Pirates, number 8. It has climbed to number 9, which knocked Transformers out of the top 10. The people at Paramount must be on suicide watch.
I am so happy about that. So irrationally happy about that.
And rounding out the top 10 is Logan, which will be out of the top 10 shortly. If Thor and Justice League doesn't knock Logan out of the top 10, Star Wars will. That's just the way it is.
Yeah. Between those three.
And Thor is tracking to make the top 10. So yeah, it's done. It was a big win for Fox this year.
Honestly, if I was the people at Fox, I'd re-release Logan theatrically once Oscar season starts. I would seriously give that another run through, like if it gets nominated for some stuff, and it should.
I mean, it did well. It was wildly profitable. It only had a $100 million budget, and it's made $616 million. But it's also its most profitable movie, or its highest grossing, I should say, movie this year. If you take Logan out of the top 10, that's it for Fox. Fox's next best movie this year was The Boss Baby,
which was terrible. Just terrible.
My kid likes it, and that's who it was meant for. After that is War for the Planet of the Apes.
I don't care. That doesn't stop it being terrible. It just means your kid liked it.
Again, it was meant for kids. It wasn't meant for Mr. Wizards.
I mean, he comes out wearing a suit, and no one seems to bat an eye at this. That movie makes no sense.
Okay, it makes perfect sense in its own world. Yeah, I'm just looking at the studio take for this year. Logan's its number one movie, then The Boss Baby, then War for the Planet of the Apes, then The Kingsman, then Aliens, then Captain Underpants. Captain Underpants
Not a
actually
good
did
year
not
for
do
Fox.
well. On a $40 million budget, it made eventually it made some money, $120 million roughly. So I would say closer to when its release, it wasn't doing that well. I remember it was way down for a while. All right, that's all I got for the money. Next week is Jigsaw. Horror movies, especially around Halloween, do fine. I'm sure Jigsaw will make money.
Look, I've said this before. Much as I love the first two Saw movies and can tolerate a few of the others, they keep going because they are reasonably budgeted to a devoted audience. I mean, they don't cost more than about $40 to $50 million to make. And they're pretty reasonably guaranteed a return of, 120 to 200 some odd million. So they're just going to keep turning out profitable movies in that franchise until it dies. And it should have died a long time ago, but it's still profitable.
So it's Halloween weekend. Next weekend is Jigsaw, which we'll be reviewing. Suburbicon, which is the crime comedy with Matt Damon. Matt Damon, he's in the movie. It's Suburbicon. It's a very stylized 1950-ish piece. And then the Miles Teller, I believe it's Miles Teller that's in this. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, yes. Miles Teller. That bill's going to come due for him in the very near future. Something terrible is going to happen to him. And we'll all know that it was the devil collecting on his due.
Yeah, so I don't see Suburbicon doing well or Thank You for Your Service. I think Jigsaw is definitely going to win the weekend. But then shortly after that is Thor, which has no competition. A Bad Mom's Christmas comes out November 1st, followed by Daddy's Home 2, starring John Cena, oddly enough. And
what?
Murray.
No.
Yeah, John Cena. Yeah, John Cena's in Daddy's Home 2.
He's not starring.
Well, he's got a starring role.
He's not even in the previews.
Sure he is. Go to the movies more often.
I go to the movies as often as you do. Every single preview of that movie I have seen has not featured John Cena.
He's in it. I didn't make that up. He's in the movie.
I believe you when you tell me he's in the movie. I'm telling you he's not in the previews.
He is in the previews. I will send you video if you want.
I would, please. If you have video evidence, I would appreciate it.
Okay. So Daddy's Home 2 is November 10th.
Although this will kill my conspiracy theory that Mark Wahlberg is actually just a detachable limb of John Cena that he sends out, and that's why you never see them in the same place at the same time.
You're so witty. And Murder on the Orient Express. And so I'm surprised you're not twisting my arm to go see that, to go review that one.
Much as I do want to see it, and I do hope it does well, because legitimate mystery whodunit movies are rapidly dying, and it's a genre I think we need to try and save. It's got Johnny Depp in it, and I'm just not willing to twist your arm over anything related to Johnny Depp.
Fair point. Justice League is the 17th, and that's up against a religious animated picture brought to you by Sony, and
nothing.
The drama.
It's up against nothing.
The drama with the kid with the plastic surgery face, Wonder, which no one's going to go see. I don't know why they would release that at the same time as Justice League. And then shortly after that,
Justice League is going to suck, but everyone's going to see it.
Yeah, shortly after that is Coco. Are
we doing Coco?
We sure are, Binky. And then shortly after that is Star Wars. So anyway, my point being that anything that came out that we're talking about right now is going to be forgotten about very quickly if it hasn't already. Like anyone that was going to go see this weekend's movies isn't going to see has already seen them and is not. And then no one else is going to see these movies the rest of the year. We're done here. So poor Geostorm's going to lose $100 million.
I told you.
All right.
I seem to recall telling you this repeatedly when you put it on the schedule.
Yeah, but I still wanted to see it, and I still wanted to review it.
I could have saved us so much time and energy. So much.
What else? Oh, what else would you be talking about tonight? Nothing. That's what you'd be doing. All right, let's get on with this.
All right, this should be an interesting segment this time around.
Are you ready?
Also, and I mean this, I 100% mean this, I am prepared to be the only man standing on the hill saying Thor Ragnarok sucks if that's what I feel like after I've seen it. I'm warning everybody right now.
Terrific. Let's get through Jigsaw first.
I mean, we will, and I'll enjoy it, and I'll enjoy mocking you over your being a girly man about it, but...
I don't even think Jigsaw is going to, frighten me as much as I don't want to see people mutilated, and I'm going to hate you for this.
No, look, the first few entries into that franchise, legitimately good horror movies, with some actual scares, plot, atmosphere. After you get to about 3, they turn into torture porn. I'm under no illusions. Jigsaw's not going to be good. But if I have to suffer through the 8.5 million movies you throw on here because, well, they're franchises and you like me suffering, if I can sneak 1 or 2 in, I'm going to do it. Because you are going to suffer more than I am.
So, in this relationship, I'm Jigsaw, is what you're telling me?
This is more akin to the final bit. This is gonna bite me in the ass hilariously next week, mind you. But this is more the end of a very specific episode of The Simpsons, where Todd Flanders, and Bart Simpson are playing miniature golf in a tournament, and Homer and Ned have a bet about which of their children will win. And the loser of the bet must mow the lawn of the winner in his wife's best Sunday dress.
Yeah, I remember this.
The language of the contract that they actually signed over this is that the father of the boy who doesn't win has to do this rather than the father of the loser. Ned objects to the use of the word loser. So when Bart and Todd at the end decide they want to call it a draw on the last hole, and they go down as co-winners, Homer is happy to point to the contract and say, it says the father of the boy who doesn't win. Well, they both lost. You'll have to do it too. It'll be worth it to watch you suffer. I am Homer Simpson in this equation. I'll suffer next week through a terrible movie that denigrates a franchise that has some legitimately great movies that I genuinely love. But if I can suffer through Tremors 5 Bloodlines and Hellraiser Revelations, further bastardizing franchises that I love, I'll suffer through this one just to get nearer to even with you.
Okay. You happy now you got that out of your system?
I'm not a happy man, Mark.
Are you satisfied enough that we can move on to the next segment?
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
All right. Alyssa Wilkinson of Vox says, the level of boredom I experienced during Geostorm ought to qualify as at least a second-degree felony in the state of New York.
Much as that's a funny line, if I'm going to yell at people over using fun as some kind of objective criteria, I'm equally yelling at them about boredom. Now, thankfully, this individual couched it as I experienced boredom, rather than simply saying this is a boring movie, so I applaud that. But really, that's your complaint? You were bored? You're not going to complain about the effects. You're not going to complain about the narrative. You're not going to complain about anything that is so blatantly wrong with this movie. It's just, I was bored. I was so bored I wanted someone to be arrested. I mean, isn't that just what liberals lay around thinking all day? God, I'm bored. I wish they'd arrest some white guy.
Speaking of liberals being bored, Susan Granger of SSG Syndicate, a miscalculated cataclysm crippled by bad timing. She is, of course, insinuating that with all the stuff going on in the world, that this was ill-timed.
Which is just stupid. Like, that's a stupid point. You should feel bad about yourself over that one. I mean, you don't even have, like, you could actually talk about the timing within the film and how that's a problem, which it is. But instead, you're going to try and use a review about a terrible disaster movie to make a statement about the world. I hate you so much for this. You are what's wrong with the world. You're foisting a political and personal belief into something that where it has no point, it has no place, it has no bearing on anything. Don't bring it up. No one cares.
Fred Topple of We Live Entertainment, in one of the rare fresh reviews, says, Geostorm seems to understand disaster porn better than Roland Emmerich himself. There is a lot of exposition, but there still are a lot of action scenes. Remember, Independence Day really only has 3.
Do I really have to? Okay, no. This is actually funny. This is legitimately amusing to me. You know who directed this thing? Because I do.
Dean Devlin.
A fellow by the name of Dean Devlin. This was the first movie Mr. Devlin has ever directed. Do you know where he got his kicks as a producer? Who his most famous collaborator as a producer is?
Roland Emmerich.
The fellow by the name of Roland Emmerich. Devlin's a producer on, like, everything that Emmerich has done. Independence Day, Godzilla, Stargate. And I can't remember if Emmerich was Stargate or not, but I think it was. That's just off the top of my head. Yeah. Again, this saying that he understands disaster porn better than the guy who actually popularized the concept is fundamentally erroneous based on the evidence in this movie. And also hilarious because you've completely ignored the fact that the only things Devlin knows about this he learned from Roland Emmerich. I mean, was Roland Emmerich just the only guy whose name you knew to associate with large-scale disaster movies? And you just
I need to interrupt you here for a second because I haven't watched MMA in a long time. While I was going through chemotherapy, I couldn't get past 9, 10 o'clock at night without falling asleep. And it's one thing to watch the WWE Network and pass out in my bed. You know, I'm paying for the network anyway, so if I fall asleep while watching one of their pay-per-views, it's not a big deal. I'm not paying like $50 or whatever the fuck it is for a UFC pay-per-view
at a minimum,
and then I fall asleep, well before we get to a main event. So
they completely time those things around the West Coast. It's a terrible, terrible problem, and you are not the only one to suffer for it.
So your main event comes between like midnight and 1 usually, and I'm so fast asleep it's not even funny, especially over the summer. Like I said, when I was going through chemo. But I'm still doing the 401 Mania MMA Factor Fiction, so I find myself getting these questions. I have no idea what. Like I just did one this past week. Fire reminded me of it. I got them today, and I turned them in. But I have to do a lot of research on these. I have to do a lot of research on these because I have no idea what the hell he's talking about half the time. I don't follow what's happening in the sport really anymore. I'm 50-50 on even if I get GSP versus Bisping. My point is, I could just answer the questions based on like nothing, just assuming things. But I'll go as far as if I have an idea in my head of an argument I want to make sure I have all the details correct, and I'll go look up the details. Like I was making an argument about Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather, probably specifically Conor McGregor, drawing the best he'll ever draw in his life against Mayweather. It's not getting any better than that. They've already broken records with that pay-per-view boxing match.
Indeed they have.
But I wasn't sure if they actually broke records or not. So before I made that statement, I went and looked it up.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they've like confirmed to have broken the 4.7 million. That they broke Pacquiao Mayweather by a non-significant margin.
Yes, they did. So my point being, I'm not a journalist. I'm not a professional journalist. I'm a professional social worker. But in my role as as writing for 411, which is I do, contributor, I actually will do research, and I find it hilarious and upsetting that we have professional reviewers who don't do even a minimal amount of research when making statements like the one I just read and you reacted to. Not even didn't even do a Google of Dean Devlin to see who he's worked with.
I mean, again, I didn't even have to look. I looked that up after a second, but as soon as his name came up at the end of that movie, I went, "Oh, that explains it." This guy, because I know, but yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly on that.
Robbie Collin of the Daily Telegraph UK. Watching Gerard Butler solve a whodunit is like watching chimpanzees move a piano downstairs. A kind of teeth-bearing, flea-picking burlesque of recognizable human behavior that's funny for a while until you start to worry about the ethics of it.
Wow. How did he get to an ethical quandary about this?
I don't know. But before you say anything, Before you say anything, I got to tell you about Peter Sabinski's from RogerEbert.com, who's a top critic, who said, really could have used a Sharknado or two to liven things up. All right, now go.
Shut the I mean, it could. Let's be very clear about this. Like, it needed, you and I brought up, it needed another one. It needed one more big action sequence. It needed a signature sequence, which is really what this movie was lacking. There's nothing that'll stick with you. Most other good disaster movies have at least one. There's one that that's where it came from. It came from this movie, and it looks great, and it stays with you. And this didn't have it.
Right.
So while I agree with his point, the fact that he brought up Sharknado immediately means he should be disqualified from ever being associated with Roger Ebert.
A.O. Scott from the New York Times, top critic, says, Geostorm uses digital technology to lay waste to a bunch of cities and hacky screenwriting to assault the dignity of several fine actors.
That's not actually all that inaccurate.
All right, I'll do one more of these, and we're going to call it a night. Let me find a good one here. Find
Mr. Morgenstern. Have we shamed him into retirement yet?
Let's see. This is funny, actually. Matt Singer of Screen Crush. Most of this movie is a slog, but the final act achieves a kind of transcendent idiocy.
Well, that is the point when even you said, I've had enough. I've stands all I can stand. I can't stand no more.
Yeah. Luke Buckmaster of the Daily Review says, Geostorm brings tin-eared dialogue and squirrely, logic-deprived plot lines aplenty. Miraculously, however, I had quite a bit of fun with it. Get him, Winfree.
I'm glad you had fun with it. I know a lot of people who are entertained by jingling keys. Would you like some of those? I mean, I can respect people who have a different sense of fun than I do. I really can. Like, Mark has a different sense of fun than I do. I have a different sense of fun than anyone listening. Sure, they may overlap from time to time, but they're largely unique to each individual. Boy, that's redundant. It's one of the things that I have come to loathe about criticism and the way it's couched and written today is that we pretend that these individual things are not only societal norms, like I could probably accept the argument about fun put forth in the concept within the confines of the argument that as a societal norm, people like, the majority of people will have fun. The majority of people like watching roided up monsters give each other head trauma on a field wearing shoulder pads. Like, okay, fine. I'm prepared. I like watching men fist fight. Okay. I'm not claiming moral superiority here by any stretch of the imagination. But when you try to say, like, no, like, just, if your only defense, I said this before, if your only defense is I had fun, you don't actually have a defense. You don't have a rebuttal. You have made a tacit admission of the fallacious logic that your own argument is stationed upon. If you had fun, I'm glad you did. I would like to have more fun in my life. I think we all should, provided, we can do so safely within the bounds of the law and not being monumental jackasses to each other. If you have fun at something that I don't have fun at, Godspeed, party on. I'm prepared to let other people enjoy themselves. Nothing wrong with that, but you're a critic. You're a professional critic. That should not be the crux of your argument. And I get the feeling I'm going to be repeating that phrase a lot when we talk about Thor.
Jesus Christ. You are a dog with a bone, man.
Have you read some of the early reviews, like actually read them?
Yeah. And I understand that's a lot of what it is. That's a lot of what it is. It's, essentially it's just saying, look, we couldn't take Thor seriously when the writers and producers did, but now that they've made Thor into a comedy, we like it.
Yeah, and that really gets my goat. Like, I am planning on yelling at so many of them when we talk about that movie.
Okay. I'll set the show for 2 hours, and we'll spend most of it doing this bit.
Hey, come on, guys. It was fun. Really, it was brightly colored and had funny dialogue. Yeah, again, like, I hate to bring this up, but so's My Little Pony. A lot of bright colors, a lot of funny dialogue. Doesn't make it good.
Oh, My Little Pony was fine. Stop picking on that movie.
It's just an example. I have others I could use. Would you prefer I use another one?
No, because now I'm afraid of what you're going to come up with.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. Next week, speaking of making fun, Rob gets to torture me with torture porn. I don't see what I've done. The Schadenfreude
is enormous on my end. I just want to let you know.
I don't see what I've done this year to deserve having to watch people being mutilated. I just don't.
Do you really want to know?
No.
I can list. No. I have a list.
No. I got to send you next year's. Next year's list sucks so bad it should be studied.
I know. We talked about this a little bit like a month ago, and I went, why on God's green earth is this the spate of movies we have for next year?
Yeah, it's like, I think Hollywood has pretty much written off 2018 outside of the Avengers, and that's it.
What do you bet the Avengers gets pushed back just for the hilarity? Like, no legitimate reason, just like, well, 2018 is going to suck except for when Thanos shows up. What if Thanos didn't show up until 2019? Well, then there's nothing good about 2018. Yeah, let's do that. It'll be funny.
Yeah, 2018 is just 2019 and 2020 have some badass movies coming out. 2018 has like a handful that look okay, and the Avengers, and then that's it. The rest of it is like let's just get through this. So anyway, so next week Jigsaw, week after that Thor. Last week we did Voltron in the place of a Damn You Hollywood. Voltron season 4 on Netflix. The Punisher dropped recently. The date for The Punisher, rather, dropped recently. So let's take a quick look at November, because November's got a lot of stuff going on. We've got
We're doing Stranger
Thor.
Things.
No, I mean we can. I'd have to do it on a Thursday because the Tuesdays are all booked up. But,
I get that. I was curious as to whether or not you were contemplating adding it as a TV party schedule, because season 1 was so good, and I'm like irrationally hyped for season 2.
I haven't watched it, so.
Oh, come on! It's 8 episodes. That's all.
Okay. We'll see what we can do. We got Thor. We got Black Mirror season 3 on November 14th, rather. Justice League on November 21st. Coco on the 28th. We've got Punisher season 1 December 5th. I understand it's coming out the same day as Justice League, but because of Justice League and then Coco, unless I did it on a Thursday, which I don't want to do, we had to, because again, the Thursday after it comes out is Thanksgiving, so that's not happening. And then the only other time we could have done it would have been the 30th. So we moved it to December 5th. After that is The Crown season 1 with Andrew Graham, then Star Wars, then Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle, and then we are done. That's actually the last show of the year. The following week after that is January 2nd. And right now I don't have anything booked for January 2nd. I usually give like that first week off so everyone can get a break from the constant podcasting. But we have a Metal Hammer of Doom scheduled for that week, so I don't know. Maybe we'll, myself, Rob, Pat, Sean, we'll all come up with something, and we'll start January 2nd.
Yeah, we could do a year in review for 17, and I can yell about it some more.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
Again,
however,
there's ideas. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, go ahead and do your plugs there, sir.
Mark and I both kind of brought it up, but we will be in Fact or Fiction this week in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania, so give it a read, vote for who you think won. This last Sunday, the 411 Ground and Pound radio show returned. I did not have an illness and a traffic incident and any number of other complicating factors that contributed to last Sunday being canceled at the last minute. We reviewed Fight Night 119, which wasn't much. It was just kind of an event. But, Darren Till knocked the stuffing out of Cowboy Cerrone in the first round, so we talk about that. We also do some preview work for UFC Fight Night 119. Lyoto Machida returns to fight Derek Brunson. And there's a lot of really good fights on that main card, just guys you may not have ever heard of, but it's a pretty solid card. So Saturday you can find me covering that in the MMA Zone of 411 Mania, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time we will be reviewing that event and previewing UFC 217. I basically refuse to acknowledge the main event, but the co-main event's really good. The fight below that's also really good. Stephen Thompson and Jorge Masvidal ought to be pretty good. And Johnny Hendricks desperately tries to hold on to his job against an up-and-coming middleweight. I am more interested in Johnny Hendricks versus the scale, but such is life. So you can tune in to hear us preview that event this coming Sunday. And on Tuesday, Mark and I will be back to talk Jigsaw, and I can enjoy his discomfort, because I'm a terrible human being.
Don't like seeing people mutilated.
Oh, but it's done so badly.
That's so terrific.
So we will be back to talk about that. Until then, thank you all for tuning in. It's always appreciated. If you missed our last show, we reviewed Blade Runner 2049. You can find that in the archives. Feel free to do so. Until next time, for Mark, I'm Robert. Thanks again for being here, and please continue to be well, be safe, and behave.